Picture the night. Not just any night, but a specific, quiet evening in the vastness of the Nevada desert. It's 1989. The sun has long since surrendered to a profound, velvet darkness, one that seems to swallow sound and stretch endlessly in every direction. During the day, this landscape is a tapestry of beige and rust, a hard-baked world of scrub brush and sun-bleached stone. But at night, it transforms. The heat of the day recedes, chased away by a cool, dry air that carries the faint, clean scent of sage and distant rain. It's the kind of coolness that seeps into your clothes, a gentle reminder of the desert's true, quiet power. And above it all, the sky. If you've never stood in a true desert at night, it's difficult to convey the sheer scale of it. Without city lights to wash it out, the cosmos reveals itself in overwhelming detail. It's not just a few twinkling stars. It's a swirling river of diamond dust, a dense, three-dimensional tapestry where the Milky Way doesn't look like a faint cloud but a spilled carton of luminous milk across the black velvet. That night, like countless nights before it, that sky was a silent, majestic dome. It watched over the sleeping forms of the spring mountains to the west, their peaks just dark, jagged cuts against the lesser black of the horizon. Over in Las Vegas, the human world hummed along its familiar, neon-lit track. The Strip was a caterpillar of garish light, a buzzing island of noise and ambition. But out here, beyond the last glow of its periphery, the desert held a different kind of energy. It wasn't empty. It was full of a deep, resonant silence, full of shadows that seemed to hold their breath, full of the ancient knowledge of stone and sand. This is a land accustomed to secrets. For decades, it had cradled hidden things in its remote valleys and forbidden ranges, places with names that would become whispers in certain circles. Groom Lake, Area 51, S4. The desert didn't give up its truths easily. It simply waited, a patient keeper of the world's most classified curiosities. Feel that cool air on your skin. Listen to the absolute quiet, broken only by the occasional skitter of a kangaroo rat or the mournful sigh of a breeze through dry creosote. Look up at that impossible sprawl of stars and consider, for a moment, the perspective. We are so small here. Our lives, our cities, our concerns feel fleeting against this timeless expanse. And yet, it's in this very landscape of profound scale and secrecy that the most extraordinary human stories sometimes take root. The desert's silence isn't passive, it's anticipatory. It's the pause before a revelation, the held breath before a whispered truth finally finds its voice. On this particular night, that sense of anticipation was more than just a feeling conjured by the atmosphere. It was a tangible undercurrent. While most of Nevada slept, while tourists played blackjack under artificial stars, a different kind of reality was stirring in the darkness. The stage, set by geology and government secrecy over countless years, was finally ready. The deep, enduring silence of the desert was about to be punctuated, not by a sonic boom from a test flight, but by a story so incredible, so paradigm-shifting, that it would begin not with a public announcement, but with a fearful, clandestine meeting. In the darkness of the Nevada desert, one man was about to break a silence that had lasted decades. The secret hadn't left the desert. Not yet, but it was preparing for its journey into the light, carried by a physicist who had seen the unimaginable and a journalist brave enough to listen. The night held its breath, the stars kept their cold watch, and everything was about to change. While the desert kept its ancient vigil, in a nondescript office in Las Vegas, a man named George Knapp was doing what he did best, digging. The year was 1989, and Knapp wasn't your typical Vegas reporter chasing celebrity gossip or casino scandals. He was an investigative journalist for Class TV, a serious man with a calm demeanor and a reputation that carried weight. In a city built on illusion, George Knapp was known for dealing in facts. His was the kind of face you trusted, thoughtful eyes, a steady gaze, the look of someone who listens more than he talks. He had built his career on stories that mattered, peeling back layers on political corruption, organized crime, and environmental issues. He was a truth seeker, and the Las Vegas community knew it. So, what was a journalist of his caliber doing even glancing at the fringe world of UFOs? For Knapp, it wasn't about little green men or sensational headlines. It was about a pattern. Over years of reporting, he'd encountered too many credible people, pilots, law enforcement officers, military personnel, who had seen things they couldn't explain. Their stories had a consistency that nagged at his professional intuition. They weren't seeking fame. Often, they were risking ridicule. Knapp approached the topic not as a believer, but as an investigator. If there was a phenomenon here, he reasoned, it deserved the same rigorous, skeptical scrutiny he applied to any other story. The career risks were real. Dipping a toe into flying saucers was a quick way for a serious journalist to be dismissed as a crackpot. But Knapp's curiosity, that essential engine of any good reporter, was stronger than his fear of sidelong glances. His method was methodical, almost clinical. He began gathering every piece of information he could find: declassified documents, pilot reports, historical accounts. He sought out the researchers who focused on data over drama. He wasn't building a case for aliens. He was building a case that something unexplained was occurring, and that the official response to it was often one of deliberate obfuscation. He noticed the curious gap between what people of standing reported and the reflexive, almost theatrical, dismissal from certain authorities. That gap, that space between the testimony and the official story, is where a journalist like Knapp lives. It's the scent of a bigger truth. He cultivated sources within the military and aerospace circles around Nellis Air Force Base and the vast Nevada test and training range. He learned to speak the language of clearances and compartmentalization, understanding that the real secrets here weren't guarded by men in black suits, but by layers of bureaucracy and a culture of secrecy so ingrained it was second nature. George Knapp was becoming quietly, meticulously, an expert on the ecosystem of secrecy that thrived in his own backyard. He was preparing the ground, though he didn't yet know for what. The call, when it came, was carefully orchestrated to avoid detection. It wasn't a call to the newsroom, but to a more private line. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, but carried an undeniable tension, the kind that comes from carrying a truth you know could shatter your life. The man didn't introduce himself with a name. Instead, he led with a statement so audacious it would have made most journalists hang up with a scoff. He claimed to be a physicist. He claimed to have worked at a place called S4, near the Area 51 testing site. And he claimed his work there involved the back engineering of captured vehicles that were not of this earth. George Knapp listened, his reporter's mind racing. Skepticism was his first and most natural reaction. Las Vegas was full of characters with elaborate stories. But this was different. The man wasn't offering vague tales of lights in the sky. He was speaking in the precise, technical language of advanced physics and compartmentalized security. He mentioned specific elements, like the mysterious substance 115, and described gravitational propulsion systems in terms that sounded less like science fiction and more like classified science. He knew acronyms and code names that matched whispers Knapp had only heard on the very fringes of his own investigation. The details were the hook. They were specific, complex, and internally consistent in a way a fabulous story rarely is. Yet, curiosity had to be balanced with extreme caution. This could be an elaborate hoax, a disinformation campaign, or a person suffering a genuine break from reality. Knapp's first step was vetting. He began a quiet, discreet check. Could this person's educational background in physics be verified? Were there gaps in his employment history that matched his story of working at clandestine facilities? Knapp used his network of sources, asking oblique questions, looking for any thread that could be pulled without revealing why he was asking. The preliminary, indirect verifications were unsettling. They didn't prove the man's incredible claims, but they didn't disprove his identity as a scientist who had vanished into the world of classified government work. After a series of these guarded calls, a meeting was arranged. The precautions were elaborate, straight out of a spy thriller. They would meet not in Las Vegas, but in a location even more anonymous. A quiet, unassuming town well outside the glare of the city. The instructions were precise: a specific diner, a specific booth, at a specific time. There would be no preliminary acknowledgement. Knapp was to bring no one, not even a photographer. The man promised he would find him. The weight of the moment settled on Knapp. He was stepping across a threshold. On one side was his established career as a respected investigator. On the other was a shadowy path that could lead to the story of a lifetime, or to professional oblivion. He was gambling his reputation on the word of a ghost. The man on the other end of the line claimed he had worked on alien spacecraft. Could it possibly be true? The chosen diner was a study in American anonymity, a place of vinyl booths, the smell of old coffee, and the low hum of a roadside existence. George Knapp sat in a corner booth, far from the window, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He didn't know who he was waiting for, only that he was waiting. The normalcy of the scene, the clatter of plates, the waitress calling out an order, felt surreal against the gravity of the potential meeting. He was a journalist on a stakeout for a secret from another world. Then a man slipped into the booth opposite him. He was unassuming, with a quiet intensity in his eyes. He didn't offer a handshake, only a small, nervous nod. This was Dennis. Up close, the man seemed to carry a palpable burden. He was intelligent. That much was immediately clear from his focused gaze and precise manner of speaking, but layered over that intelligence was a deep-seated anxiety. His eyes would occasionally flick toward the door, a subtle, unconscious scan for threats. He spoke softly, leaning in, his words measured. This wasn't a performance. This was a confession. He reiterated his demand for anonymity. His life, he explained calmly, was already in danger for merely considering this conversation. Using his real name was impossible. For the public, for now, he would be Dennis, a simple alias to place a fragile barrier between his revelations and his identity. The weight of his decision to be here at all hung in the air between them. He was risking everything: his career, his freedom, potentially his safety. He wasn't doing it for money or fame. He explicitly rejected both. He was doing it, he said, because he believed the public had a right to know that the physics they were taught was a precursor, a kindergarten primer, compared to the technology being hidden. Knapp, the seasoned investigator, listened and assessed. He was looking for the cracks, the inconsistencies, the theatrical flourishes of a liar. He found none. Instead, he found a man who was profoundly uncomfortable being the center of attention, yet driven by a sense of ethical necessity. Dennis's nervousness didn't read as guilt over fabrication. It read as the legitimate fear of someone who had broken a sacred vow of secrecy. His technical explanations, while mind-bending, were delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had not just read about these concepts, but had worked with them. He talked about element 115 not as a magical substance, but as a stable, heavy element with unique properties that could generate a gravitational field. He described the craft's propulsion not with wild gestures, but with the frustrated precision of an engineer trying to explain a blackboard full of advanced mathematics to a layperson. The details were the anchor. He described the interior of the S-4 facility, not in broad strokes, but with specifics about the hangar bays built into a mountainside, the odd, dull silver finish of the craft that seemed to absorb light, the small, child-sized seats. He mentioned working alongside other scientists who were just as bewildered, given only isolated pieces of the puzzle. These weren't the grandiose details of a Hollywood script. They were the mundane, peculiar, and highly specific details of a workplace. A bizarre workplace, yes, but one described with the ring of truth. As Dennis began to speak, Knapp realized this wasn't just another UFO story. This was different. He was no longer just listening to a source. He was listening to a witness from a hidden world, and the doorway to that world was sitting in a diner booth, scared out of his mind, but speaking anyway. Leaving that diner, George Knapp carried a story that felt like a live wire in his hands, powerful, dangerous, and crackling with potential. He now faced the monumental journalistic dilemma. What do you do with information this explosive? His internal debate was fierce. On one side was his journalistic duty. If even a fraction of what Dennis said was true, it was the most important story of the century, a truth buried by secrecy. On the other side was profound responsibility. Broadcasting these claims could destroy the source's life, invite legal and government retaliation, and risk Knapp's own hard-won credibility. Was he prepared to be labeled a sensationalist for the rest of his career? The process that followed was meticulous, not rushed. Knapp took his notes and his assessment to the decision-makers at Klaus. This wasn't a pitch made lightly. Meetings were held with station management and legal teams, the mood tense and sober. They pored over every claim, every potential legal liability. Could they be sued for defamation? What were the national security implications? The career consequences were clear for everyone in the room. Attaching their reputations to flying saucer stories was professional Russian roulette. Yet, the specificity of the source's information, his credible demeanor, and the absence of a profit motive created a compelling case. Ultimately, they made a courageous choice to proceed, but with extraordinary protections. Dennis would remain a silhouette, his voice electronically altered. The focus would be on the detailed nature of his testimony, not on sensationalism. Knapp and his team prepared not for ratings, but for history. They crafted questions designed to elicit clear, technical descriptions, avoiding wild speculation. They prepared for the inevitable backlash, the dismissals from officials, the laughter from colleagues. This was about presenting a document, a first-hand account so detailed it would force viewers to question, not just believe or disbelieve. They were setting a charge under the foundation of public understanding. On November 10, 1989, Las Vegas television viewers settled in for the evening news. They had no idea their reality was about to shift. The broadcast began like any other. Familiar anchors, the local news theme, stories of city council meetings, and traffic reports. Then, the tone shifted. George Knapp appeared on screen, his expression graver than usual. He introduced a story, he said, unlike any they had ever aired. The screen changed. There, in stark silhouette against a dark background, was the outline of a man, his features blurred into shadow, his voice subtly distorted into a robotic monotone. It was an image designed for anonymity, yet it screamed of conspiracy and deep secrecy. This was Dennis. And then, he began to speak. In that calm, altered voice, he described working at a secret base called S4, south of Area 51. He spoke of examining 9 disc-shaped craft housed in hangars built into a mountain. He detailed their propulsion, based on the manipulation of gravity using an unknown element. He described the vehicle's interior, the strange metal, the sense of working on technology that was not just ahead of its time, but from entirely outside our understanding. In living rooms across Las Vegas, people put down their dinners. The mundane world of the evening news had fractured, and through the crack poured a narrative that belonged in science fiction, yet was being presented with the sober cadence of a whistleblower's testimony. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. Phones at the Klaus newsroom began to light up. Some callers were skeptical, dismissive, laughing it off as a ratings stunt. But many others were captivated, even validated. They were the people who had seen strange lights over the desert, who had heard the rumors about Groom Lake. who had always sensed a hidden layer to the vast emptiness around their city. For them, this wasn't a wild story. It was a key clicking into a lock. A local mystery had suddenly been given a name, a location, and a terrifyingly plausible explanation. The broadcast ended, but the story did not. It escaped the confines of the television screen and took root in the community's consciousness, growing into a legend, a controversy, a permanent question mark. But who was this silhouetted man, and what had he really seen in the Nevada desert? To understand the man who would become Dennis, we need to step back from the desert shadows and into the bright, sprawling suburbs of Southern California in the 1960s and 70s. This was the world where Bob Lazar grew up, a world seemingly defined by its normalcy, sun-drenched streets, the scent of cut grass, the distant hum of freeways. But inside the young Lazar's mind, a different, more extraordinary universe was taking shape. From a remarkably early age, he was captivated not by sports or typical teenage pursuits, but by the fundamental mechanics of reality. How things worked, why they worked. He was a tinkerer, a born experimenter. While other kids were out playing, Bob was often in his family's garage or backyard, surrounded by wires, chemicals, and salvaged electronics, trying to make his ideas take physical form. His was a practical, hands-on intelligence. He didn't just want to read about physics in a book. He wanted to feel its principles in action. This led him to chemistry sets that were a little more volatile than his parents might have preferred, to building rockets that actually flew, and to taking apart every appliance in the house just to see the gears and circuits inside. It wasn't about causing mischief. It was a deep, driving curiosity to reverse engineer the world. He had that rare quality of seeing ordinary objects not for what they were, but for the scientific potential they contained. A car wasn't just transportation. It was a system of combustion, mechanics, and energy transfer to be understood and, perhaps, improved. This relentless curiosity naturally extended to the biggest questions. Like many children of the space age, he was fascinated by the cosmos. But Lazar's interest went beyond simple stargazing. He devoured books on theoretical physics, on relativity, on the very nature of gravity and propulsion. He was drawn to the edges of known science, to the places where textbook certainty gave way to speculation and wonder. He wasn't satisfied with accepted explanations. He wanted to know what came next, what lay beyond the current limits. This combination, a mind that could grasp complex theory and hands that loved to build and test, formed the core of his identity. He was becoming a bridge between the abstract world of equations and the tangible world of nuts and bolts, engines and energy. Even as a young man, Lazar was drawn to the impossible, to making the theoretical real. It was a trait that would define his entire life, leading him down paths of incredible innovation and, ultimately, to a desolate spot in the Nevada desert that would test everything he thought he knew about the possible. Bob Lazar's adult life became a fascinating tapestry woven from two distinct threads: legitimate, respected science and bold, entrepreneurial engineering. This wasn't a man living on the fringes. He was operating within established systems while simultaneously pushing their boundaries. The first and most crucial credential was his employment at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico in the early 1980s. This is a matter of public record, confirmed by the lab itself and contemporary phone directory listings that placed him there as a contractor. Los Alamos is the birthplace of the atomic bomb, a hallowed ground of American scientific might. Working there, even as a contractor for the Kirkmeyer Company, placed Lazar in an elite ecosystem of physicists and engineers. His role involved work on particle accelerators, delving into the fundamental forces that hold matter together. This was serious, complex science. But Lazar's mind was too restless to be confined to a single lab. Alongside this theoretical work ran a parallel passion for high-speed, hands-on engineering. He founded a company called United Nuclear, which initially supplied radioactive materials and scientific equipment to labs and researchers. More publicly, he became obsessed with a personal project, building a jet-powered car. This wasn't a hobby. It was a professional-grade engineering challenge. He worked out of a hangar at the airport in Anaheim, California, meticulously assembling a vehicle designed to shatter land speed records. The Lazar jet car was a real, physical manifestation of his dual nature. It applied principles of thrust and aerodynamics he understood from physics to a roaring, fire-breathing piece of machinery he could touch and tune. This unique combination is what makes his background so compelling. In one world, he was a scientist comfortable with the abstract mathematics of subatomic particles. In the other, he was a mechanic, an entrepreneur who got his hands dirty with welding torches and fuel lines. He spoke the language of both the PhD in the theoretical physics department and the fabricator in the machine shop. This blend made him unusually useful. He could understand a radical theory and immediately grasp the practical challenges of building something based on it. He also, through his work and his business, developed a network of contacts that spanned the worlds of government contracting, private research, and aerospace. He was a known quantity to people who worked on advanced projects. It was this unusual combination of skills that would catch the attention of someone very interested in Bob Lazar. He had proven he could handle classified science at a national lab, and he had proven he could build extraordinary machines with his own two hands. To certain people looking for a very specific kind of mind, Bob Lazar wasn't just a candidate. He was a potential solution. The approach, when it came, was cloaked in layers of professional legitimacy that made it impossible to immediately dismiss. It began not with a stranger in a dark suit, but through a connection within Lazar's own scientific network. The pivotal figure was the legendary physicist Edward Teller, a founding father of the hydrogen bomb and a towering, if controversial, figure in the world of high-level government science. Lazar had met Teller briefly at a conference and later sent him information about his own work on a proton beam projector. Whether it was this device, his Los Alamos background, or his jet car work that sparked the interest is unclear, but a message filtered back to Lazar. There might be special project work available for someone with his unique skill set. The initial contact was a phone call from a man who identified himself as being from a branch of the Department of Naval Intelligence. The offer was deliberately vague, speaking in terms of advanced propulsion systems and classified research projects at a remote test site in Nevada. The salary mentioned was substantial, almost absurdly so for the described work, which itself was a red flag, or a powerful lure. The interview process that followed was unlike any corporate job interview. It was less about assessing technical knowledge, which they seemed to already assume he had, and more about testing discretion, psychological stability, and loyalty. The questions probed his attitudes towards secrecy, his personal life, and his willingness to follow orders without question, to work in total isolation on problems he would not be allowed to discuss, even in vague terms. Then came the security clearances. The background investigation was extraordinarily deep and intrusive, far exceeding what he had experienced at Los Alamos. Investigators interviewed childhood friends, former teachers, neighbors, and ex-girlfriends. They combed through every aspect of his financial and personal history. The process felt less like being hired and more like being absorbed by a silent, powerful organism. Throughout it all, a sense of profound gravity was communicated. He was made to understand that if he proceeded, his life would no longer be his own in many ways. Normal freedoms would be exchanged for access to something beyond normal understanding. The feeling was not just one of intrigue, but of slight ominousness. A door was being opened, but he could sense it was a door that locked from the inside. For Bob Lazar, the decision was a collision of every driving force in his life. The scientist in him was burning with curiosity about the advanced propulsion mentioned. The engineer was tantalized by the promise of working on the ultimate machine. The risk-taker, the man who built jet cars, was drawn to the sheer magnitude of the unknown. Despite the ominous undertones, the pull of the technical mystery was too strong. He said yes. He signed the stacks of non-disclosure agreements, documents that threatened draconian penalties for even the slightest breach. He was given a time, coordinates, and instructions. He had agreed to step into the black world of special access programs. When Bob Lazar said yes, he had no idea he was agreeing to work on technology not of this world. He believed he was walking toward the pinnacle of human engineering. He was, in fact, walking into a hangar to study something that was not human at all. The journey to work was a descent into another America, one hidden from maps and ordinary life. It began before dawn. Bob Lazar would drive his own vehicle from Las Vegas, heading north on the empty, two-lane blacktop of the extraterrestrial highway. The city's neon glow faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by an endless expanse of sagebrush and shadow. The landscape didn't just become empty, it became forbidding. The mountains in the distance weren't scenic, they were silent sentinels. This was a land that communicated a clear message: you are not welcome here. The first security checkpoint was a shock of harsh light in the pre-dawn gloom. A guarded gate, armed personnel, serious faces illuminated by floodlights. His badge was scanned, his identity confirmed. This was only the outer ring. From there, he transferred to a bus with darkened windows, joining a handful of other silent personnel. The bus moved deeper, onto a network of unmarked dirt and gravel roads that wound through canyons and over rocky passes. Through a sliver of uncovered window, he caught his first, distant glimpse of the Groom Lake dry lake bed, the heart of the Area 51 legend, with its massive runway stretching into the desert like a scar. But the bus didn't stop there. It continued south, skirting the edge of the Papoose Mountains, heading for an even more remote and tightly guarded location, S4. The facility was a masterpiece of concealment. From the air, it would have looked like nothing more than the natural slope of a mountain range. Up close, the illusion was revealed. Built directly into the side of a mesa were 9 large hangar doors, each angled and painted to perfectly mimic the surrounding rock and soil. It was a literal fortress carved into the earth. The bus pulled into a covered bay, the massive door sliding shut behind it with a definitive thud, sealing them inside the mountain. The air changed. It was cool, filtered, and carried a faint, sterile scent of ozone and concrete. The sounds of the desert, the wind, the distant cry of a bird, were gone, replaced by the hum of massive ventilation systems and the echo of footsteps on polished floors. The transition from the open, ancient desert to this artificial, hidden womb was absolute. He had arrived at one of the most secret places on Earth. The sense of isolation was complete, the weight of secrecy palpable. Nothing could have prepared him for what waited inside those mountain hangars. Stepping off the bus into S4 was like entering a high-tech, subterranean hospital for machines. The lighting was a bright, shadowless fluorescence that left no corner in gloom. The walls were smooth, poured concrete, and the air was noticeably cool and dry, meticulously climate-controlled. The first order of business was a security indoctrination that bordered on theatrical in its severity. He was shown a short film that detailed, in grim terms, the consequences of disclosure, not just prosecution, but implied far worse fates. He signed more documents, each one reinforcing that he now existed in a world where the normal rules of citizenship and conversation did not apply. Compartmentalization was the law of the land. He was given a badge with specific, limited access codes. His workspace, his hallway, the cafeteria, these were his entire universe. Asking another scientist about their project was not just frowned upon. It was a fireable and possibly unthinkable offense. He was led through long, identical corridors, past closed doors marked only with numbers. Occasionally, he'd pass another person in a lab coat or military fatigues. Eye contact was brief, nods were curt. There was no camaraderie here, only a shared, unspoken understanding of the weight they all carried. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of machinery and the distant, muted whir of ventilation. He was taken to a small, windowless office that would be his. On the desk was a stack of manuals and schematic packets, all stamped with various classifications. The initial briefing was delivered by a man who gave only a first name, Barry. The language was careful, technical, and deliberately incomplete. Lazar was told he would be working on the propulsion system of an advanced vehicle. The principles, Barry explained, involved gravitational field manipulation. They needed someone with his background in particle physics to help understand the reactor's energy source and the waveguides that directed its effect. Lazar's mind raced. Gravitational propulsion was the holy grail of theoretical physics, a concept he'd only ever seen in equations. The idea that it was not just real, but in a form he could physically work on, was staggering. The briefing ended with a simple directive: study the provided materials. The real work would begin tomorrow. But as he was being shown back to the departure area at the end of his shift, they took a different corridor. They stopped before one of the massive, angled hangar doors. A security officer input a code. With a deep, hydraulic sigh, the door began to retract sideways into the mountain, revealing not an aircraft, but a curved, dull metallic surface that filled the opening. It was just a glimpse, a sliver of a curved edge, but it was enough. His guide quickly punched another code, and the door slid shut. The message was clear. This was his purpose. The preparation was over. And then they showed him the discs. The following day, they took him inside. The hangar was a cavernous space, cold and silent. And there, resting on three dull, metallic-looking tripod landing gears, was the vehicle. His first impression was not of awe, but of profound simplicity. It was a disc, yes, but its lines were so seamless, so perfectly curved. It looked less like a constructed machine and more like a single piece of hardware that had been grown or poured into its form. It was about 40 feet in diameter, with a gentle dome on top. The color was a non-reflective, matte silver gray, like brushed aluminum, but it seemed to absorb the hangar's light rather than reflect it, giving it a strangely muted presence. He approached, his scientist's mind kicking in, searching for the tells of human manufacturing: rivet lines, weld marks, panel seams, access hatches. He found none. The surface was continuous, unblemished. He was told he could touch it. The material was cool, but not like metal. It had a peculiar density to it, a solidity that felt deeper than its thickness should allow. It was utterly inert. No vibrations, no hum of electronics, no sense of internal machinery. It sat there in perfect, silent contradiction to every aircraft he had ever known. This was the moment of cognitive rupture. The theoretical puzzle of gravitational propulsion was one thing. But this physical object in front of him defied the foundational logic of his profession. There were no engines, no intakes, no exhaust, no control surfaces. It was a machine that obeyed a physics he did not recognize. Bob Lazar's life would never be the same. And soon, neither would ours. Within the sterile, mountain-housed hangar of S4, Bob Lazar was assigned to a specific vehicle. Among the handful of craft he reported seeing, one became his primary focus. He would later refer to it informally as the sport model. The name itself is telling. It suggests something nimble, functional, and, in its own way, perhaps even sleek. The craft was a classic, flattened disc shape, approximately 52 feet in diameter from edge to edge. It wasn't a bulky saucer from a 1950s movie poster. Its proportions were elegant, its curves fluid and continuous. It rested not on a landing skid or gear, but on three dull, metallic-looking spheres that seemed to be part of its structure, giving it a subtle, tripod stance. Walking around it, the the first thing that struck any trained engineer was the absolute lack of visible construction. In our world, we build things by joining parts. We see the seams, the rivets, the welds, the panel lines where access doors are placed. This craft showed none of that. The surface was a single, unbroken expanse of material from the central dome to the outer rim. It was as if the entire structure had been cast or grown as one perfect piece. Running his hand along it, Lazar described the texture as smooth but not polished. It had a slight, almost soapy feel, like anodized aluminum, but denser. The color was a consistent, non-reflective dull silver, a color that seemed to swallow light rather than bounce it back, making the craft appear oddly muted under the bright hangar lights. Around the perimeter of the disk, just below the upper curve, were a series of portholes or viewports. They weren't glass windows as we know them, but appeared to be made of the same seamless material, only slightly translucent. They were evenly spaced, suggesting a logic to their placement, perhaps related to the pilot's field of view or the craft's internal configuration. The overall aesthetic was one of profound minimalism. There were no protruding antennae, no sensor arrays, no visible engine nozzles, not even a marking or insignia. It was a study in functional purity. Every line, every curve, seemed to serve a direct purpose in aerodynamics, or more accurately, gravidodynamics, that he didn't yet understand. It looked both alien and, in its perfect simplicity, oddly elegant. It didn't scream technology. It whispered it in a language of flawless form. It was a machine that had eliminated all superfluous parts, all the clutter of human engineering. But the exterior was just the beginning. Inside was where the real impossibility lived. Within the sterile, mountain-housed hangar of S4, Bob Lazar was assigned to a specific vehicle. Among the handful of craft he reported seeing, one became his primary focus. He would later refer to it informally as the sport model. The name itself is telling. It suggests something nimble, functional, and, in its own way, perhaps even sleek. The craft was a classic, flattened disc shape, approximately 52 feet in diameter from edge to edge. It wasn't a bulky saucer from a 1950s movie poster. Its proportions were elegant, its curves fluid and continuous. It rested not on a landing skid or gear, but on three dull, metallic-looking spheres that seemed to be part of its structure, giving it a subtle, tripod stance. Walking around it, the first thing that struck any trained engineer was the absolute lack of visible construction. In our world, we build things by joining parts. We see the seams, the rivets, the welds, the panel lines where access doors are placed. This craft showed none of that. The surface was a single, unbroken expanse of material from the central dome to the outer rim. It was as if the entire structure had been cast or grown as one perfect piece. Running his hand along it, Lazar described the texture as smooth but not polished. It had a slight, almost soapy feel, like anodized aluminum, but denser. The color was a consistent, non-reflective dull silver, a color that seemed to swallow light rather than bounce it back, making the craft appear oddly muted under the bright hangar lights. Around the perimeter of the disk, just below the upper curve, were a series of portholes or viewports. They weren't glass windows as we know them, but appeared to be made of the same seamless material, only slightly translucent. They were evenly spaced, suggesting a logic to their placement, perhaps related to the pilot's field of view or the craft's internal configuration. The overall aesthetic was one of profound minimalism. There were no protruding antennae, no sensor arrays, no visible engine nozzles, not even a marking or insignia. It was a study in functional purity. Every line, every curve, seemed to serve a direct purpose in aerodynamics, or more accurately, gravidodynamics, that he didn't yet understand. It looked both alien and, in its perfect simplicity, oddly elegant. It didn't scream technology. It whispered it in a language of flawless form. It was a machine that had eliminated all superfluous parts, all the clutter of human engineering. But the exterior was just the beginning. Inside was where the real impossibility lived. Gaining access to the sport model was itself a lesson in its alien design. There was no obvious hatch, no lever or button. A technician would use a small, handheld device near a specific point on the hull, and a section of the seamless surface would silently acquiesce, sliding inward and then aside to reveal an opening just large enough for a person to crouch through. Inside, the atmosphere changed. The air was still and carried a faint, ozone-like scent, mixed with something else. A smell Lazar could only describe as like burnt metal or static electricity. The first thing you noticed was the scale. The ceilings were low, forcing an average-sized adult to stoop slightly. The corridors connecting the compartments were narrow. This was not built for human comfort. It was built for efficiency by beings with a different physical blueprint. The interior layout was sparse and enigmatic. A central corridor led from the entry point toward the heart of the craft. Along this passage were small, sealed compartments of unknown purpose. The main chamber was dominated by a central column that ran from the floor to the ceiling. This, he would learn, housed the reactor. Surrounding it were what could only be control consoles, but they bore no resemblance to an aircraft cockpit. There were no yokes, no pedals, no banks of labeled switches. Instead, there were smooth, contoured surfaces with what appeared to be hand-sized indentations. In some areas, there were raised patterns or symbols that seemed to be integrated into the material itself, as if grown there, glowing with a soft, internal light of their own. Most striking, and perhaps most chilling, were the seats. There were several of them, arranged in a loose circle facing the central column. They were small, too small for an adult human. They had a simplistic, almost childlike contour. Sitting in one was an uncomfortable reminder of your status as an interloper in this machine. Scattered throughout the interior, on panels and along sections of the walls, were sequences of strange symbols. They weren't decals or paint. They seemed to be part of the material's surface, etched or formed into it. They resembled a flowing, geometric script, utterly unfamiliar and clearly not meant for human eyes to decipher. The entire environment felt deeply, fundamentally other. The lighting was indirect, emanating from the very walls and surfaces, casting no shadows. The silence was absolute, with none of the subtle groans or hums you feel in a ship or aircraft. It was a vessel in perfect, dormant stillness. Everything about the interior confirmed what Bob already knew. This was built by someone else. For a physicist like Bob Lazar, the true revolution wasn't the craft's shape or its interior, but the answer to the fundamental question, how does it fly? According to the briefing documents he was given and his own observations, the sport model didn't have engines in any conventional sense. It had no intake, no combustion, no exhaust plume. Instead, its propulsion was based on the direct manipulation of gravity itself. The principle, as it was explained to him, revolved around three devices called gravity amplifiers or gravity emitters. These were not massive engines, but relatively compact units positioned at the bottom of the craft, arranged in a triangular pattern. Think of gravity not just as a force that pulls us down, but as a wave, a field that permeates all space. Our physics understands this field as something we are subject to, like a fish in a current. The technology in the craft, however, treated gravity as something you could shape and direct. The gravity amplifiers, powered by the central reactor, would generate an intense, focused gravitational field. But instead of pulling everything toward the craft uniformly, they could, through mechanisms Lazar speculated involved super-heavy elements and precise waveguides, focus this field in a specific direction. If you create a powerful gravitational pull beneath the craft, you're not lifting it with thrust. You're essentially making the Earth itself pull the vehicle downward with immense force. To rise, you would instead focus that amplified gravitational field above the craft, pulling it upward. The elegance and the utter strangeness lay in the control. By minutely adjusting the focus and strength of these three separate amplifiers, the craft could tilt, bank, and accelerate in any direction with unimaginable precision and without any inertia. There would be no G-forces crushing a pilot because the craft isn't pushing against the air, it's manipulating the space-time around it. It's essentially falling gracefully in whichever direction the pilot chooses. This explained the craft's seamless exterior. It didn't need to be aerodynamic because it didn't move through the atmosphere by displacing air. It could move seamlessly from the vacuum of space to our atmosphere because its method of travel was fundamentally tied to gravity, not to fluid dynamics. For Lazar, this was the ultimate mind-bender. It rendered so much of conventional aerospace engineering obsolete. It also presented a physics problem. Generating such a focused gravitational field requires an energy source of staggering density and stability, something far beyond our chemical rockets or even theoretical nuclear fusion. The craft's performance, its instant acceleration, its right-angled turns at high speed, weren't miracles. They were the logical outcome of a technology that had mastered the most fundamental force in the universe. It was a solution so elegant it seemed obvious in retrospect, yet it stood in complete contradiction to the known laws of physics. It was a key that didn't just open a door. It revealed that the room we'd been living in had an entirely different set of architectural rules. The power source for these gravity amplifiers was even more extraordinary. At the heart of the reactor, and therefore at the heart of the entire propulsion system, lay the key ingredient. What Lazar was told was element 115. In 1989, this was a staggering claim. On the periodic table known to public science, the heaviest element created in a lab was element 109. Element 115 didn't exist. Lazar's briefing stated it was not found naturally on Earth, but was harvested elsewhere. He was shown a small quantity of the material at S4, a dull, metallic substance, described as being incredibly dense. He was told its most critical property was stability. In the world of super-heavy, artificially created elements, instability is the rule. They decay in fractions of a second. This 115, however, was stable enough to be used as a fuel source. Its role in the reactor was breathtaking in its implications. According to the technical documents, a small piece of element 115 would be placed in the reactor core. When bombarded with protons in a particular way, it would undergo a reaction that produced antimatter. Now, in our physics, antimatter is the ultimate theoretical energy source, but it's fantastically dangerous and difficult to produce and contain. Here, the reaction was described as controlled and self-sustaining. The antimatter would then annihilate with matter in a perfectly contained chamber, converting 100% of the fuel mass directly into energy, with no radioactive waste. This wasn't nuclear fission or fusion. This was matter-antimatter annihilation, the holy grail of energy production, purportedly made practical by the unique properties of this stable, heavy element. That energy wasn't for electricity to power lights. It was used to feed the gravity amplifiers. The element itself, due to its enormous atomic weight and specific nuclear structure, was also described as having a unique gravitational signature. When energized in the reactor, it would generate or amplify gravity waves, which the amplifiers could then focus. In essence, element 115 was both the incredibly potent fuel and the gravitational lens or transducer. This is where Lazar's claims venture into their most controversial territory. Years after his story went public, in 2003, a team of Russian and American scientists did synthesize a few atoms of element 115 in a laboratory. The synthesized version, named moscovium, was highly unstable, decaying in less than a second. This is exactly what mainstream science predicted and appears to directly contradict Lazar's description of a stable, usable material. This discrepancy is the core of the scientific skepticism. Lazar's supporters offer potential explanations. Perhaps the stable isotope requires a different number of neutrons, or perhaps the material he saw was indeed from another source with different physical laws. The debate is intense. But one fact remains from his testimony. Whether element 115 worked as Lazar described remains hotly debated. But something powered those tests he witnessed. Something allowed those disks to perform maneuvers that defy our understanding of physics. The controversy over the element's nature doesn't erase the other, tangible details of the story, the craft, the facility, the tests. It simply adds another, deeper layer of mystery to an already incredible tale. Theory and schematics were one thing. Witnessing the sport model in action was another entirely. Lazar learned that test flights were conducted on a regular schedule, typically on Wednesday nights. From a secure observation area within the S4 perimeter, he and other personnel would watch as one of the disks was brought out of its mountain hangar. The procedure was silent. There was no roar of engines spooling up, no blast of exhaust. The craft would simply be positioned, and then, with a soft, almost imperceptible hum you felt in your bones more than heard with your ears, it would begin to glow. A faint, bluish-white luminescence would emanate from its underside and the portholes, as if the material itself was becoming energized. Then it would lift, not with a lurch or a jump, but with a smooth, steady ascent, as if it were being hoisted by an invisible cable. It would rise a few hundred feet above the desert floor and then begin a distinctive wobbling motion. Lazar described it as similar to a gyroscope or a coin spun on a table just before it settles, a rhythmic, side-to-side rocking. He believed this was a characteristic of the gravity propulsion system coming online, a physical manifestation of the gravitational waves being balanced and focused by the three amplifiers beneath the craft. Once the wobble stabilized, the true performance began. The craft could accelerate from a hover to a speed that made it look like it vanished, not in a blur, but as if it simply decided to be somewhere else. It could make right-angle turns without slowing, tracing sharp, geometric paths in the night sky that mocked the very concept of inertia. It could shoot straight up and disappear from view in seconds. All of this was done in utter silence, save for a faint, electrostatic crackle in the air if you were relatively close. Standing there in the cool, desert night, watching this small, glowing disk rewrite the rules of motion, Lazar experienced a profound collision of emotions. The scientist in him was exhilarated by the sheer technological wonder. The human in him felt a deep, existential awe and a chilling sense of dislocation. The universe, he realized in those moments, was not as he had been taught. The evidence was right there, dancing silently against the stars. Bob Lazar brought friends to watch those Wednesday night tests. That decision would change everything. The weight of what he knew, combined with the sheer, visual wonder of the test flights, became too much for Bob Lazar to bear alone. The human need to share, to have others validate an incredible experience, overwhelmed the security oaths. He began with his closest friends, including John Lear, a well-known figure in aviation circles with an interest in UFOs. He couldn't show them documents or bring them to S4, but he could show them the effects. He told them where and when to look. On subsequent Wednesday nights, a small group would make the long drive out to a public overlook near the Tikaboo Peak Range, miles from the base, but with a distant view of the test area. Through high-powered telescopes and binoculars, they watched the glowing disks perform their silent, impossible ballet in the distant sky. For Lazar, there was a powerful thrill in it. He was no longer just a prisoner of the secret. He was sharing a glimpse of a new reality. He saw the shock and awe on his friends' faces, the confirmation that he wasn't crazy. But in the world of black budgets and special access programs, There are no private moments on the periphery. Security at these facilities extends far beyond the fence line. Patrols, sensors, and aerial surveillance monitor the surrounding desert. It was only a matter of time before the watchers were detected. The government doesn't like it when you break your security clearance. What happened next would force Bob's hand. The fallout from being caught watching the test flights with friends was swift and chilling. For Bob Lazar, the atmosphere at S4 changed overnight. Where there had been a degree of professional distance, there was now cold suspicion. He was pulled into meetings where questions were less about his work and more about his activities outside the facility. The inquiries were veiled, but the threat was clear. His security clearance, and by extension his freedom and safety, were dangling by a thread. Then came the strange incidents. Mysterious vehicles parked outside his home for hours. Phone calls where no one spoke on the other end. A break-in at his business, United Nuclear, where nothing of obvious value was taken, but papers were disturbed. The message was being delivered not with a shout, but with a whisper. We are watching, and we can reach you. The pressure wasn't just on him. He began to fear for his wife, Tracy. The thought that she could be harassed or endangered because of what he knew was unbearable. It became clear that simply quitting his job at S4 wouldn't make the problem go away. In the world of classified programs, you don't just walk away. You are absorbed or you are erased. Lazar arrived at a desperate but logical conclusion. Silence made him a target. Going public, as counterintuitive as it seemed, could be his only insurance policy. If his story and his identity were out in the world, known to millions, making him disappear would only confirm its truth. It was a shield forged from transparency. He knew he needed a credible platform. That's when he and his friend John Lear made the decision to contact George Knapp. They knew of his reputation for serious investigation into UFO phenomena. The initial contact was cautious, a test to see if Knapp would dismiss them outright or, worse, sensationalize them. Knapp's methodical vetting process, his skepticism, and his focus on details over drama convinced Lazar that this was the right path. They agreed to an interview, but with strict conditions for the first one. He would be a silhouette, his voice distorted. He would be Dennis. Even with this protection, the days leading up to the taping were filled with last-minute doubts. Was he trading one kind of danger for another? Was he about to become a permanent public pariah? But the alternative, living in silent fear, was worse. On May 15, 1989, under the alias Dennis, Bob Lazar stepped in front of George Knapp's camera. The interview that aired on Class TV in May 1989 was unlike anything typically seen on local news. There were no flashy graphics, no dramatic music. The visual was stark, a man in silhouette against a dark background, his features blurred into an anonymous shadow, his voice rendered into an emotionless, robotic monotone by a pitch-altering device. This was Dennis. George Knapp sat across from him, his demeanor calm and journalistically precise. He asked direct, technical questions, avoiding the sensational. He wanted specifics, dimensions, locations, physics. And from that shadowed figure came answers delivered with a calm, almost weary certainty. Lazar, as Dennis, described S4's location south of Area 51. He detailed the sport model's seamless, 52-foot diameter construction. He explained the 3 gravity amplifiers and the reactor powered by Element 115. He spoke of the Wednesday night test flights, the silent ascent, the distinctive wobble, the impossible right-angle turns. What made it compelling wasn't the wildness of the claims, but the opposite, the methodical, technical, and strangely mundane way he described the utterly extraordinary. He sounded less like a prophet and more like an engineer giving a debrief on a problematic prototype. It was this very matter-of-factness that caught viewers off guard. This wasn't a man shouting about aliens. It was a man calmly explaining a bizarre workplace. In living rooms across Las Vegas and the surrounding desert communities, people sat up. Pilots, engineers, and those who worked in or around the aerospace industry listened closely. Many of the details, the location, the security protocols, the culture of secrecy, rang true based on their own experiences with the classified world. The phone lines at Kloss lit up and stayed lit for days. The switchboard was flooded. Some callers were furious, calling it a hoax. But many more were fascinated, shocked, or strangely validated. They called to share their own stories of strange lights over the test ranges, or to thank the station for having the courage to air it. The story instantly escaped the confines of a single news broadcast. It became the dominant topic of conversation at coffee shops, in office break rooms, and on local talk radio. A local mystery had been given a startlingly specific explanation. The conversation had shifted from, "Do UFOs exist?" to, "Did someone just tell us where they are and how they work?" But this was only the first interview. 6 months later, Bob Lazar would remove the shadow. In the 6 months following the Dennis interview, Bob Lazar's life had not gotten easier. The subtle intimidation had continued. His educational records, he claims, began to disappear. His past was being systematically erased, making him look like a fraud to anyone who tried to verify his background. The strategy of anonymity as protection had a flaw. It allowed the system to discredit the story without confronting the man. Lazar realized that staying in the shadows made him and his claims easier to dismiss. He and George Knapp made a calculated, brave decision. For the next interview, there would be no distortion, no silhouette. He would present himself, fully visible, as Robert Scott Lazar. He would put a human face, with all its expressions and nuances, to the incredible story. On November 10, 1989, they did just that. The visual contrast was shocking. Where there had been a featureless shadow, there was now a man. A young, intelligent-looking man with earnest eyes, speaking in his own, slightly nervous but clearly intelligent voice. He was no longer a specter. He was a person. This made everything he said feel exponentially more real, more consequential. Knapp guided him through even more detailed technical descriptions. This time, Lazar brought diagrams he had sketched himself, layouts of the S-4 facility, cross-sections of the sport model showing the reactor column and the gravity amplifiers. He pointed to specific areas, explaining the fuel transfer process, the waveguides for the gravity waves. He described the interior with the small seats and the strange symbols. The interview was no longer just a shocking claim. It was a detailed technical briefing being delivered to the public. The risk was monumental. By showing his face, he was inviting every form of scrutiny, ridicule, and retaliation imaginable. But his logic was clear. The retaliation was already happening. He had nothing left to lose by being honest, and everything to gain by forcing the world to confront the messenger along with the message. The act of stepping into the light was an act of defiance and a plea for credibility. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The local story detonated into a national, then international, media frenzy. News agencies that would never touch a UFO story were now covering the Area 51 physicist who made astounding claims. His name and face were everywhere, on newspaper front pages, on national talk shows, in magazine features. The world now knew his name, and the world wanted answers. When Bob Lazar stepped into the light, he brought with him a comprehensive, interconnected narrative that went far beyond a simple UFO sighting. It was a detailed report from inside a decades-long, ultra-classified program. His claims, taken together, formed a breathtaking alternative history of technology and contact. First, the inventory. He stated there were 9 disc-shaped craft stored at the S-4 facility. They weren't all identical. He described variations in size and configuration, suggesting to him they came from different origins or served different purposes, with the sport model being just one type. This implied a collection, not a single accident. The core of the technology, he repeated, was the propulsion system. 3 gravity amplifiers powered by a reactor fueled by element 115. This wasn't just an engine. It was a new branch of physics made practical, enabling silent, inertialess flight by manipulating gravitational fields. But where did it come from? Lazar reported that according to the briefing documents he was shown at S4, the craft, or at least the one he worked on, originated from the Zeta Reticuli star system, a binary star system about 39 light-years away, already famous in UFO lore from the Betty and Barney Hill case. The briefings went further, he said, suggesting this wasn't a recent arrival. They included references to archaeological evidence indicating these beings had been visiting or interacting with Earth for thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of years. This led to the ultimate claim, a massive, ongoing government program of reverse engineering. The goal wasn't just to understand the craft's operation, but to replicate the technology, to weaponize it, and to control the paradigm-shattering knowledge it represented. This program, he asserted, had been running since at least the 1970s, following the retrieval of these craft. The implication was staggering. A small group within the military-industrial complex had been sitting on world-changing technology, actively concealing it from the public and the broader scientific community, maintaining a status quo of energy and propulsion while holding the keys to a new world. These weren't vague claims. They were specific, technical, and checkable. So what happened when people started checking? The story of the Area 51 physicist didn't just make waves. It created a cultural tsunami. Almost overnight, it vaulted from a Las Vegas news segment to front-page headlines across the country. National newspapers and television networks, which had long treated UFOs as a fringe topic, now had a credible-looking man with specific, technical details. They framed it as a mystery. Was this an elaborate hoax, a disinformation campaign, or the real deal? The UFO community, often fragmented, found a rallying point. For them, Lazar was the ultimate insider, the whistleblower who had finally provided the technical blueprint they had been waiting for. Conferences buzzed with analysis of his every word. The scientific establishment, however, reacted with profound skepticism and often outright dismissal. Mainstream physicists pointed out the glaring issue with element 115, stating the known laws of nuclear physics made a stable version impossible. They argued his descriptions, while sounding technical, sometimes mixed accurate concepts with speculative ones in ways a trained physicist might not. The loudest voices in academia largely wrote him off, protecting the integrity of their field from what they saw as contamination by pseudoscience. The most telling reaction, however, was from the government, a deafening, monolithic silence. The Air Force, the Department of Energy, and the CIA offered no comments, no confirmations, no denials. They simply refused to acknowledge the story existed, a tactic that, to many, spoke volumes. In Nevada, the impact was immediate and tangible. Public fascination with the formerly obscure Area 41 and Groom Lake exploded. The tiny desert town of Rachel, Nevada, the closest settlement to the extraterrestrial highway, saw its first wave of curious tourists, drawn by the newfound notoriety. The story spread internationally, translated and debated in Europe, Asia, and beyond. Bob Lazar had successfully injected his narrative into the global bloodstream. For the average person, it became a thrilling what-if, a topic for late-night discussions, a reason to look at the night sky a little differently. It challenged belief systems and ignited imaginations. But not everyone was fascinated. Some were very, very concerned about what Bob Lazar had revealed. With a story this explosive, verification was inevitable. Journalists and independent researchers immediately began digging. They confirmed his employment at Los Alamos, a crucial point of credibility. But when they looked for his educational background, things grew strange. Records of advanced degrees from Caltech and MIT, which Lazar claimed, seemed to vanish or could not be found by the institutions. Attempts to find anyone who could corroborate his presence at S4 ran into the brick wall of government secrecy. No one would talk, and no records were accessible. The investigation became a hall of mirrors. Each piece of corroborating evidence, like the Los Alamos directory, was matched by an erasure, like the missing diplomas. What investigators found, and didn't find, would become as mysterious as the original claims. At the heart of the controversy swirling around Bob Lazar lies a single, persistent enigma: his education. In interviews and conversations, Lazar stated he earned master's degrees in physics and electronics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and the California Institute of Technology, Caltech. These are not just any schools. They are citadels of scientific prestige, whose alumni records are meticulously maintained. When journalists and investigators contacted these institutions in the early 1990s to verify his attendance, they hit a wall. Both MIT and Caltech reported finding no records of a Robert Lazar or Bob Lazar ever being enrolled as a student. This remains the most significant point against his credibility. For skeptics, it's an open and shut case. If he lied about his credentials, he could be lying about everything. But the picture is complicated by what can be verified. His employment at the Los Alamos National Laboratory is a matter of public record, confirmed by the lab itself in a 1993 statement to the Las Vegas Review-Journal. More compellingly, his name appears in the 1982 Los Alamos Employee Phone Directory, a document readily available to researchers. Former colleagues from his time there have also come forward, confirming they knew and worked with him. This creates a perplexing contradiction. How does a man with no verifiable advanced degrees from top-tier institutions land a scientific position at one of the most prestigious national labs in the world? The explanations offered by both sides are deeply entrenched. Lazar and his supporters point to this contradiction as evidence of the very conspiracy he describes. They argue that after he went public, his records were systematically purged from educational databases, a deliberate act to make him appear to be a fraud and thus discredit his more explosive claims about S4. Skeptics counter with a simpler theory. He may have taken some extension courses or worked in a technical capacity at Los Alamos without the advanced degrees, and later inflated his credentials to bolster his story. The truth seems caught in a limbo between these two narratives. The verification is frustratingly selective. His professional presence is confirmed, but the academic foundation for that presence is missing. Were records truly erased to discredit him, or was Bob Lazar's background not what he claimed? This question forms the central fissure in the entire story, a rift that has never been conclusively bridged. Amidst the fog of missing records and heated debate, several key aspects of Bob Lazar's story stand on solid, verifiable ground. These facts form the stable foundation upon which the more extraordinary claims rest. First and foremost is his employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory. This is not hearsay. It has been confirmed through multiple independent channels. The most famous piece of evidence is the 1982 Los Alamos Employee Phone Directory, a public document that clearly lists Lazar, Robert, as an employee of the Kirkmeyer Company, a contractor operating at the lab. Former colleagues, including a health physicist named Dr. David L. Morgan, have publicly stated they remember working with him there. Beyond the directory, other documents have surfaced. Lazar has provided what appear to be W-2 tax forms from the 1980s showing income from defense contractors like Fairchild and EG&G, companies deeply embedded in the world of government aerospace and nuclear projects. He also possesses copies of a Navy evaluation form and security clearance paperwork, which list his birth date and social security number and detail his work on a particle beam project. While these personal documents are harder for outsiders to authenticate absolutely, they are consistent in detail and appearance with genuine government paperwork from that era. Furthermore, His demonstrated technical knowledge has often struck those who interview him as genuine. He speaks fluently about particle physics, gravitational theory, and advanced propulsion concepts in a way that aligns with someone who has worked in a high-tech environment, even if not necessarily as a physicist with elite degrees. Individuals who knew him before his public emergence, from friends to business associates, confirm his long-standing fascination with and aptitude for complex engineering and physics. The timeline of his life, his jet car project, his United Nuclear business, his Los Alamos period, is coherent and corroborated by witnesses and documents. These verifiable elements create a profile of a technically adept man who was indeed involved in the periphery of the military-industrial complex. Some things could be proven, but the most important claims remained beyond conventional verification. One of the most tantalizing aspects of Bob Lazar's story involves a specific prediction. In 1989, when he first spoke publicly, he centered the craft's propulsion on a then-unknown substance, element 115. On the official periodic table of the time, the heaviest synthesized element was 109. Lazar's claim was not just that this element existed, but that it possessed extraordinary properties. It was stable enough to be handled, served as a gravity wave source when energized, and was the key to a matter-antimatter reactor. To the scientific mainstream, this was nonsense. The very concept of a stable super-heavy element in that region of the periodic table defied all established nuclear models. Then, years later, science caught up, in a way. In 2003, a collaborative team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna successfully synthesized a few atoms of element 115. It was officially named Moscovium in 2015. For many of Lazar's supporters, this was a stunning validation. He had spoken of the element by its atomic number over a decade before it appeared in any textbook. However, the devil, as always, is in the details. The synthesized version of element 115 was highly unstable, decaying in a fraction of a second. It did not match Lazar's description of a stable, metallic fuel source. This discrepancy forms the battleground for interpretation. Skeptics see it as definitive proof that Lazar was wrong about the core of his story. He guessed an element number, but got its fundamental properties incorrect. Supporters offer nuanced counterpoints. They suggest that the stable isotope necessary for the reactor might require a specific number of neutrons not yet created in a lab, or that the material he saw was indeed from a non-terrestrial source with different physical laws governing nuclear stability. Some even posit that his story itself, whether true or not, may have influenced the researchers who eventually sought to create the element. The synthesis of element 115 stands as a unique piece of evidence. It is neither clear confirmation nor clear refutation. It is an eerie parallel, a piece of the puzzle that fits in one way but not in another. Did Bob Lazar know about an element before science discovered it? Or was it educated guessing? The element's existence proves he was right about a number. Its properties, according to our current science, suggest he was wrong about its nature. The enigma deepens. Among the many technical details Bob Lazar provided about S4, one seemingly small piece of security technology stood out as particularly futuristic for its time: the hand scanner. Lazar described a biometric security device at the facility that required personnel to place their hand on a scanning plate for identification and access authorization. In 1989, this was not commonplace technology. The concept of biometrics, using unique physical characteristics like fingerprints or hand geometry for security, was largely confined to high-level government and military research labs, and certainly not something the general public was familiar with. To many listeners, it sounded like science fiction, a detail lifted from a spy movie. The significance of this detail grew years later when it was confirmed that Los Alamos National Laboratory, where Lazar had verifiably worked, had indeed been testing and using hand geometry scanners for secure access in the mid-1980s. This technology was part of the Department of Energy's security apparatus at sensitive sites. The correlation is striking. Lazar's description of this specific, advanced security measure at a secret facility aligned perfectly with the cutting-edge and highly classified protocols being developed and implemented in the very world he claimed to be part of. It's a piece of the puzzle that fits almost too neatly. For investigators, this presents a fascinating credibility test. Could Lazar have learned about hand scanners from his time at Los Alamos and simply incorporated that realistic detail into a fabricated story about to make it sound more authentic? Absolutely. It's a plausible explanation. But the alternative is equally compelling. He described it because he encountered it, exactly where he said he did, at an ultra-secure, Department of Energy-connected facility engaged in reverse engineering exotic technology. The hand scanner detail doesn't prove the existence of alien spacecraft, but it does anchor his description of S4's security environment in a verifiable reality of late 1980s black-budget tech. It's one of those granular, technical specifics that lacks the dramatic flair of a flying disc, but carries significant weight. It feels like the kind of mundane, operational detail a real insider would recall. Small details like this either prove his presence or show remarkable imagination. Perhaps the most powerful form of corroboration for Bob Lazar's story comes not from documents, but from people, ordinary individuals who saw extraordinary things because he told them where and when to look. In the months following his decision to share his secret, Lazar took a small group of trusted friends, including aviation enthusiast John Lear, to remote vantage points near the Nevada test site. From these locations, miles from the S4 facility, but with a clear sight line, they witnessed the Wednesday night tests. Their accounts are consistent and compelling. They describe seeing a bright, star-like light appear over the Papoose mountain range. This light would then begin to move in ways that defied conventional aircraft. It could hover motionless, then accelerate to an incredible speed in an instant, leaving no trail. It could make sharp, right-angle turns without slowing. Most notably, several witnesses independently described the same distinctive wobble or rocking motion that Lazar had mentioned, a slow, side-to-side oscillation as the object first lifted off, which would then stabilize before it shot away. These were not UFO enthusiasts looking for lights in the sky. These were individuals who were taken to a specific location at a specific time and shown a specific performance. The government itself, while never addressing Lazar's claims directly, has acknowledged that test flights of experimental aircraft occur in that airspace, a blanket statement that confirms something is flying there capable of remarkable maneuvers. The value of this witness testimony is immense. It moves the story from one man's word to a shared experience. These individuals had nothing obvious to gain and risked social ridicule by coming forward. Their accounts provide a layer of evidence that is hard to dismiss as mere coincidence or fabrication. They saw a physical phenomenon that behaved according to the precise description Lazar had given in private before they ever looked through their binoculars. While it doesn't prove the object was an alien spacecraft being reverse-engineered, it strongly corroborates the core claim that something with breathtaking, physics-defying capabilities was being tested in that exact location on those exact nights. Multiple people saw something in the Nevada sky. But what were they really seeing? To engage fully with the Bob Lazar story, we must give fair hearing to the skeptical perspective, which is built on a foundation of critical questions and Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is often the correct one. Skeptics point first and foremost to the missing educational records from MIT and Caltech. This, they argue, is a fatal flaw. If he fabricated his credentials, the entire edifice of his credibility crumbles. They note inconsistencies in his timeline and employment history that don't always align perfectly with public records. From a scientific standpoint, Mainstream physicists dismiss his description of element 115 and gravity wave propulsion as incompatible with known physics, arguing his terminology sometimes mixes real concepts with fictional ones. Skeptics suggest his knowledge of elements could have come from educated guessing based on periodic table trends, not insider information. They also question his motivations, pointing to the books, interviews, and speaking engagements that followed his public emergence, suggesting a potential financial incentive. Ultimately, skeptics emphasize the burden of proof. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. While Lazar provides intriguing details and some corroboration, the hard, irrefutable evidence, a piece of element 115, a clear photo from inside S4, an official document describing the program, remains elusive. The simplest explanation, they conclude, is that Lazar is a talented storyteller who blended real experiences from the periphery of the classified world with science fiction, creating a modern myth that resonates because we want to believe. The skeptics make compelling points. Yet Bob Lazar's story refuses to disappear. In the wake of Bob Lazar's explosive televised revelations, one might have expected a swift and forceful official response. A public denial, a lawsuit for breach of secrecy, or even criminal charges. Instead, what came was something far more profound: silence. The U.S. government, through its relevant agencies, the Air Force, the Department of Energy, the CIA, maintained a strict, unwavering policy of neither confirming nor denying anything Lazar said. When pressed by journalists, the standard reply was a variation of, "We do not comment on matters of classified operations." This was not a denial of S4's existence, nor of the program. It was a strategic invocation of national security to wall off the entire topic from public discourse. This official non-response extended to Lazar personally. Despite his detailed descriptions of what would constitute massive breaches of security clearances and the Espionage Act, no charges were ever filed against him. No government agency sued him for libel or publicly branded him a fraud in an official capacity. This legal and rhetorical silence is deeply puzzling. If his story was a complete fabrication, a simple, authoritative denial from the Pentagon could have crippled its credibility. The absence of such a denial is interpreted in two ways. Skeptics argue the government didn't dignify an obvious hoax with a response, treating it as beneath notice. Believers see it as tacit confirmation. You cannot deny something that is true without lying, and you cannot admit it without catastrophic disclosure, so you say nothing. The policy of silence became the government's primary tool. For decades, even the existence of Area 51 was officially denied, until documents were declassified in 2013 that obliquely acknowledged it. But that acknowledgement came with no details, no admissions about activities, and certainly no mention of a facility called S4 or flying discs. The silence created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, Lazar's story grew, fueled by public curiosity and the lack of any competing narrative from authority. The government's strategy effectively placed the burden of proof entirely on Lazar and his investigators, knowing that burden could likely never be fully met due to the very secrecy they enforced. Sometimes what isn't said speaks louder than words. Parallel to the official silence, Bob Lazar and those close to him reported a persistent, shadowy campaign of intimidation that began shortly after his story went public. These were not official communications, but unsettling events that created an atmosphere of constant unease. Lazar described being followed by unmarked vehicles, typically dark sedans or vans with tinted windows, that would appear during his daily routines and trail him for miles before vanishing. Friends who accompanied him to watch the test flights reported similar experiences, with strange cars appearing on remote desert roads where no one should have been. The interference extended to his communications. Phone lines would crackle with strange interference, clicks and echoes suggesting monitoring. At times, calls would simply drop in the middle of conversations about sensitive topics. On several occasions, Lazar claimed that individuals who would not identify themselves, but carried themselves with an unmistakable official demeanor, would appear at his business or approach associates, asking pointed questions about his activities and his state of mind. The pressure wasn't limited to him. Friends, and even his then-wife, Tracy, reported feeling watched and experiencing strange, low-level harassment. The most dramatic incident cited by supporters occurred much later, in 2017, when Lazar's scientific supply company, United Nuclear, was raided by a joint federal task force. Officially, the raid was part of an investigation into the sale of restricted chemicals used in homemade pyrotechnics. While a legal rationale existed, the timing and scale of the operation, involving armed agents from multiple agencies, felt disproportionate to many observers. To Lazar and his supporters, it was another chapter in a long pattern of using legal and bureaucratic tools to apply pressure and disrupt his life. Whether viewed as a series of coincidences or a coordinated campaign, the effect was the same. A life lived under a subtle but palpable shadow of scrutiny and threat. Were these coincidences, or was someone sending a message? One of the most enduring and meta-level mysteries of the entire saga is the claim that Bob Lazar's past was systematically erased to discredit him. The pattern is undeniably strange. Verifiable elements of his professional life exist alongside glaring, specific absences. We have the Los Alamos phone directory, but not the MIT or Caltech records. Colleagues confirm working with him, but no classmates or professors remember him. This selective vanishing act forms the bedrock of the erasure theory. The argument posits that after Lazar went public, elements within the government accessed various administrative databases, educational, possibly even Social Security or IRS records, and carefully removed traces of his academic credentials. The goal wasn't to make him disappear, but to make him look like a liar. Theoretically, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, many records were transitioning from paper to digital, but major institutions still maintained physical archives. Complete, flawless erasure across all systems would have been a monumental task, bordering on impossible, without leaving a trace of the tampering itself. This leads to a more nuanced interpretation. Perhaps it wasn't a deletion of records, but the activation of existing protocols. If Lazar's education was part of a Legends program, a fabricated background provided for deep cover operatives or scientists in sensitive programs, then those records would have been designed to be inaccessible or deniable from the start. They never existed in the public sphere to begin with. This theory elegantly explains the contradiction. The verifiable parts, Los Alamos, were his real, cover employment. The unverifiable parts, the elite degrees, were the manufactured legend that dissolved upon scrutiny once he broke cover. The process wouldn't require a team of hackers. It would simply mean the guardians of the legend stopped supporting it. The result is the perfect weapon for discrediting a whistleblower. You leave enough of his story standing to show he's connected to the secret world, but you remove the foundational credentials, forcing the debate onto the grounds of his personal honesty rather than the substance of his claims. It creates perpetual, unresolvable doubt. If you wanted to destroy someone's credibility without silencing them, wouldn't this be the perfect method? Bob Lazar's emergence in 1989 did not happen in a vacuum, nor was he the last to step forward with claims of insider knowledge about reverse-engineered technology. His case, while uniquely detailed, fits into a broader, decades-long pattern of alleged whistleblowers. Figures like aerospace engineer Anonymous from the early 1990s, who gave similar descriptions of DIS technology under the pseudonym John Doe, or more recent individuals like David Grush, a former intelligence official who in 2023 testified before Congress about secret crash retrieval programs, share common threads. They describe compartmentalized programs beyond congressional oversight, possessing exotic materials and craft of non-human origin. The similarities in their experiences are as telling as the stories themselves. Many report facing similar forms of pressure, career obstruction, veiled threats, and the frustrating erasure or classification of records that could corroborate their past involvement. The official response also follows a familiar script, a blanket no comment on specific programs, coupled with neither confirmation nor denial, effectively using the cloak of national security to avoid engaging with the substance of the claims. This pattern suggests a consistent, systemic approach to managing information leaks of this nature, regardless of the individual. Recent developments add fascinating context. The U.S. Navy's official 2020 acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and the establishment of a Pentagon task force to investigate them mark a seismic shift. While these steps do not validate Lazar's specific claims about S4 or Element 115, they officially legitimize the core phenomenon he described, the existence of advanced, unexplained aircraft exhibiting physics-defying capabilities. This shift makes Lazar's 1989 testimony appear less like wild fantasy and more like a premature glimpse into a reality the government is now, reluctantly, beginning to acknowledge. Bob Lazar was the first, but he wasn't the last. A pattern was emerging, one where individual voices, despite suppression, persistently point toward a hidden reality that is gradually coming to light. For researchers and journalists determined to find hard evidence, the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, has been the primary legal tool. Over the decades, numerous requests have been filed with agencies like the CIA, the Air Force, and the Department of Energy, seeking documents related to S4, Lazar's employment, or tests of exotic propulsion. The results have been uniformly opaque. The standard response is not a release of information, but a letter citing exemptions, most commonly Exemption 1 for national security and Exemption 3 for matters specifically protected by other statutes. On rare occasions, documents have been released, but they are often so heavily redacted, entire pages blacked out except for mundane headers or footers, that they reveal nothing of substance. A request for Lazar's security clearance paperwork might yield a document with his name and date, but every detail about the granting agency, the level of clearance, or the purpose is removed. This process creates a paradoxical form of evidence. The act of censoring the documents so thoroughly itself suggests there is something sensitive to protect, even if that something remains hidden. It confirms secrecy without revealing the secret. The legal barriers are immense. FOIA does not apply to operational files of clandestine services, and the definition of what constitutes a threat to national security is broad and subjective, decided by the very agencies being queried. For a potential program like the one Lazar describes, buried within Special Access Programs, SAPs, within SAPs, the paper trail is either designed not to exist or is protected by layers of classification that FOIA cannot penetrate. The efforts have proven one thing conclusively. If such a program exists, it is insulated from public scrutiny by the most robust legal and bureaucratic walls available. The paper trail either doesn't exist or remains locked away in the darkest vaults. The decision to speak publicly about S4 did not just make Bob Lazar famous. It defined and confined his entire life. The personal cost has been immense. His ability to pursue a mainstream career in science or engineering vanished overnight, replaced by a lifelong role as a controversial figure. Opportunities were lost, replaced by scrutiny. Every new venture, every public appearance, is filtered through the lens of his extraordinary claims. He lives with the constant judgment of being either a heroic truth-teller or an elaborate fraud, with little room for a mundane middle ground. The toll extends beyond professional life to the personal. Relationships have been strained under the pressure of perpetual controversy and the lingering, low-grade fear of surveillance or harassment. He exists in a state of unique isolation, knowing something he believes is profoundly true but can never conventionally prove, forever separated from a society that demands proof he is forbidden from providing. Yet, through decades of debate, ridicule, and fame, he has never recanted. His story has remained remarkably consistent, a fact both his supporters and detractors note. He maintains, simply, that he is telling the truth about what he saw and did. For better or worse, Bob Lazar's life became inseparable from this story. Long before the name Bob Lazar entered public consciousness, the vast, restricted airspace over the Nevada desert had already earned a formidable reputation for secrecy. It began in the 1950s with the establishment of the Nevada Test Site, a sprawling complex where above-ground nuclear explosions rattled the sky and painted the clouds with eerie, otherworldly light. But the true seed of the Area 51 legend was planted at a remote, dry lake bed known as Groom Lake. In 1955, the CIA, in partnership with Lockheed Skunk Works, selected this isolated spot to develop and test the U-2 spy plane, an aircraft that flew at altitudes then thought impossible for manned flight. Its silver wings, catching the sun at dawn and dusk, became a prime source of the era's flying saucer reports from commercial pilots. Throughout the Cold War, Groom Lake was the birthplace of aviation's most guarded marvels. The Archangel programs gave birth to the state Route 71 Blackbird, a titanium dart that could outrun missiles. Rumors swirled about even more exotic projects, the stealthy F-117 Nighthawk, and mythic concepts like the Aurora hypersonic spy plane. The culture there was one of absolute compartmentalization. Employees were flown in on unmarked planes, sworn to secrecy by draconian oaths, and worked on projects known only by code names. To the outside world, and even to most of the U.S. government, Area 51 was a blank spot on the map, a place that officially did not exist. Public knowledge was limited to the whispers of aviation enthusiasts, the frustrated reports of UFO researchers documenting strange lights, and the occasional bizarre story from a handful of workers who retired and spoke in guarded terms. It was a landscape of rumor, shadow, and legitimate, earth-shattering human technology. Area 51 existed in rumor and shadows. Then Bob Lazar gave it a face. The impact of Bob Lazar's 1989 interviews was nothing short of transformative. Overnight, the vague, shadowy notion of Area 51 was injected with a potent, specific narrative. It was no longer just a secret base for spy planes. It was, according to this new story, a repository of alien technology, a site called S, for where scientists toiled in hidden hangars. This revelation acted like a cultural detonator. Public interest exploded. The tiny, dusty hamlet of Rachel, Nevada, population under 100, found itself on the map as the UFO capital of the world. Entrepreneurs set up small businesses. The Little Alien became a pilgrimage site, and the state of Nevada officially designated State Route 375 as the extraterrestrial highway. Area 51 became a pop culture icon. It featured in blockbuster movies like Independence Day, video games, and countless television shows. The iconic, restricted area warning signs became a staple of merchandise. The very shape of a flying saucer became permanently linked to that patch of desert. The government's decades-long policy of official denial became unsustainable in the face of this cultural juggernaut. In 2013, partially declassified CIA documents finally acknowledged the existence of the Groom Lake facility, but only in the historical context of the U-2 and Oxcart programs. They confirmed the place, but not the activity Lazar described. The acknowledgement felt like a bureaucratic footnote to a myth that had already grown to colossal proportions. A secret base became a household name, but at what cost to the truth? The official confirmation of the base's existence did little to quell the more fantastic legends. If anything, it validated the public's long-held suspicion that the government had been lying about something in the desert, making all other claims seem more plausible. 3 decades after Lazar's revelations, the mythology he helped codify manifested in one of the internet's strangest and most viral social phenomena. In the summer of 2019, a joke Facebook event titled Storm Area 51, They Can't Stop All of Us, went viral. The premise was absurd. If millions of people coordinated to rush the perimeter of the base using the fictional Naruto run, they could overwhelm security and see them aliens. The internet embraced the meme with fervor. Over 2 million people clicked going, and another 1.5 million expressed interest. The response was a perfect blend of Gen Z irony, deep-seated curiosity, and a collective poke at government secrecy. The actual event in September was far smaller and more peaceful than the meme suggested. Instead of a chaotic storming, a few thousand people gathered near Rachel for the Alien Stock Festival, a blend of music, camping, and UFO-themed celebration. A handful of protesters did approach the gates, leading to a few arrests, but the feared mass incursion never materialized. The government, however, did not treat it as a joke. The U.S. Air Force and local law enforcement issued serious warnings, and security at the base was visibly and significantly heightened. The event proved that the fascination seeded by Lazar's story had evolved into a potent cultural force. It was no longer just about believing one man. It was about a generation playfully, yet pointedly, demanding transparency and engaging with a national mystery as a shared, online experience. From one man's interview to millions demanding answers, the story had taken on a life of its own. The enduring power of the Area 51 myth speaks to something fundamental in the human psyche. We are drawn to mysteries, to forbidden knowledge, to the idea that there is a deeper, hidden truth behind the curtain of everyday reality. The very word classified acts as a psychological magnet, transforming a patch of desert into a repository for our collective imagination. Conspiracy theories thrive in the gap between what we are told and what we suspect, and for decades, the government provided the perfect conditions: absolute silence, visible security, and a history of verifiable lies about the base's very existence. This secrecy breeds a profound distrust. When institutions officially deny something the public suspects and are later forced to admit a partial truth, as with the 2013 Area 51 acknowledgement, it erodes trust and makes all future denials seem suspect. The public learns that national security can be a shield for both legitimate secrets and potential deception. This dynamic creates a fertile ground for a story like Bob Lazar's. It offers a complete, internally logical framework to explain the secrecy, the lights, and the government's behavior. It satisfies the deep-seated need for a narrative that makes sense of the contradictions. The myth becomes more satisfying than a mundane, classified truth about radar-evading aircraft, because it speaks to a grander, more existential mystery. Perhaps the real question isn't what's hidden at Area 51, but why we need to believe something is. Decades on, the mythology of Area 51 shows no sign of fading. It is a permanent fixture in American cultural consciousness, a modern folklore. New generations discover the mystery through documentaries, podcasts, and internet lore, ensuring the story is continually renewed. The facility's true purpose, as a testing ground for advanced, yet terrestrial, aircraft, seems almost mundane against the grand, cosmic narrative of alien contact and interstellar technology that has grown around it. The truth, should it ever be fully disclosed, may never be as compelling as the myth. This enduring power is, in large part, the legacy of a single event, Bob Lazar's 1989 interview. He provided the specific coordinates, the technical jargon, and the human face that transformed an abstract secret into a tangible, discussable story. He built the framework upon which all subsequent speculation has been layered. Whether one views him as a prophet or a fabulist, his impact on the narrative is undeniable. He gave the mystery its vocabulary and its location. And at the center of it all remains Bob Lazar, the man who opened Pandora's box. When Bob Lazar's claims reached the broader scientific community, the response was, and largely remains, one of profound and methodical skepticism. Mainstream physicists who have analyzed his descriptions point to fundamental conflicts with established laws. The concept of a compact, stable gravity wave generator, as Lazar described, presents significant problems. According to Einstein's theory of general relativity, generating a focused gravitational field of the strength required to lift a craft would require astronomical amounts of mass energy, the kind associated with neutron stars or black holes, not a small reactor. Containing and directing such a field with precision, without tearing the craft and its surroundings apart, ventures into the realm of science fiction with our current understanding. Thermodynamics presents another major hurdle. Lazar's description of a 100% efficient matter-antimatter reaction using element 115 is, in the view of many physicists, a red flag. In known physics, such a reaction would produce not just energy, but also intense, lethal gamma radiation. The idea of perfectly containing and converting this energy with no waste heat or radiation violates the second law of thermodynamics. Furthermore, the very notion of a stable, super-heavy element like the one he describes defies the nuclear shell model, which predicts extreme instability for elements in that region of the periodic table. The scientific method relies on peer review, reproducibility, and evidence. Lazar's claims exist outside this framework. They are anecdotal, based on secret evidence that cannot be examined, and make predictions that, were testable, like the stability of element 115, have not held up. The scientific establishment's dismissal is not a conspiracy. It is a rigorous application of the burden of proof. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence presented, while intriguing to the public, does not meet the standards required to overturn foundational pillars of physics. However, a small minority of scientists and engineers, often those with backgrounds in black programs or advanced propulsion theory, remain cautiously intrigued. They acknowledge that while Lazar's story conflicts with public science, it may align with a hidden, applied science developed in classified compartments over decades. Their position highlights a unique tension. Science demands evidence. But what if the evidence is locked behind classification? While Lazar's specific descriptions clash with applied physics, they intriguingly brush against the edges of legitimate theoretical concepts. Theoretical physics is a realm of equations and possibilities that often seems like science fiction until it isn't. One famous example is the Alcubierre warp drive, a mathematical solution to Einstein's field equations published in 1994. It proposes a method of faster-than-light travel not by moving through space, but by contracting space in front of a craft and expanding it behind, effectively riding a warp bubble. This requires exotic matter with negative energy density, something not known to exist, but it establishes that manipulating spacetime for propulsion is a subject of serious, if highly speculative, academic study. The concept of gravity manipulation is not inherently absurd. It is the entire basis of general relativity. We simply lack the technology to do anything but passively experience it. Theoretical work continues on gravitomagnetism and quantum gravity, seeking to understand the force at both cosmic and subatomic scales. Furthermore, quantum mechanics, with its spooky action at a distance and particles that exist in multiple states until observed, reminds us that the universe operates on rules that defy common sense. The line between impossible and not yet understood in science is constantly shifting. A century ago, the idea of harnessing the power within the atom was theoretical fantasy. Today, it powers cities. Universities and private labs do conduct advanced propulsion research, exploring concepts like electromagnetic drives, laser propulsion, and even fringe ideas about inertia manipulation. The work is slow, underfunded, and bound by public knowledge. This creates a fascinating thought experiment. If a breakthrough in gravity control were made in a classified program, the physics presented to the public would remain unchanged, creating the exact appearance of impossibility that Lazar's story faces. The technology would be magic until it was revealed, at which point it would become a new branch of engineering. What seems impossible today may be tomorrow's breakthrough, or it may remain impossible forever. Theoretical physics keeps the door to wonder slightly ajar, even if it doesn't open it onto a hanger at S4. The universe is vast, ancient, and seemingly ripe for life. This simple observation leads to the famous Fermi paradox, posed by physicist Enrico Fermi. If intelligent life is probable, where is everybody? We see no definitive signs, no galactic communications, no visitors. Bob Lazar's story, if true, provides a direct and stunning answer to this cosmic riddle. They are here. They have been here. And a secretive branch of the government has been studying their technology for decades. In this context, the paradox isn't a paradox at all, it's a cover-up. This solution has profound implications. It suggests we are not the pinnacle of intelligence or technology, but a younger species being observed, perhaps even guided or manipulated, by a far older one. It places humanity not at the center of a lonely cosmos, but as participants in a populated and possibly busy interstellar neighborhood. Statistically, the likelihood of other intelligent life is high. Given the billions of Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone, many scientists believe life elsewhere is almost a certainty. The fact we haven't detected clear radio signals could simply mean that advanced civilizations use communication technologies we can't yet perceive, or that they choose not to broadcast. Lazar's claims feed into what some call the zoo hypothesis, or interventionist solution to the Fermi paradox. The idea is that advanced civilizations are aware of us, but deliberately avoid open contact, allowing us to develop naturally. Unless, perhaps, they crash, leaving artifacts for us to find. The government reverse engineering program Lazar describes would then be humanity's first, furtive attempt to join the galactic conversation by stealing the answers. If Bob Lazar is telling the truth, we're not alone. We never were. The silence of the cosmos isn't empty. It is, according to this view, discreetly occupied. Before accepting an extraordinary conclusion, rational inquiry demands we examine more ordinary explanations. Several plausible alternatives exist for the Bob Lazar phenomenon. The first and most grounded is simple misidentification. The Nevada desert has been a testbed for radically advanced human aircraft, stealth technology, drones, and hypersonic vehicles. What Lazar witnessed and worked on could have been a highly classified, exotic human technology, its true nature obscured by compartmentalization. He may have been given a false briefing about alien origins as part of a disinformation campaign, either to protect the technology's terrestrial origins or to test his loyalty. Psychological factors also offer explanations. The human mind is adept at constructing coherent narratives from fragmented or high-stress experiences. Confabulation, filling memory gaps with fabricated details perceived as true, is a well-documented phenomenon. The intense secrecy and strange environment of a place like S4 could have fostered such effects. Other motivations cannot be ignored. The desire for attention, financial gain from media appearances, or the psychological payoff of being central to a world-changing mystery. This is where Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation with the fewest assumptions is often correct, is frequently applied. The simplest explanation is that Lazar, a technically skilled individual with experience at Los Alamos, either witnessed advanced human projects and misinterpreted them, or constructed an elaborate story blending real elements of the classified world with science fiction. This requires no belief in faster-than-light travel, stable super-heavy elements, or a decades-long alien cover-up. It only requires an understanding of human psychology, the existence of secret aircraft, and the allure of a great story. Every mystery has multiple possible solutions, which requires the fewest assumptions. For those who find Bob Lazar credible, the reasons are multifaceted and deeply felt. Foremost is the remarkable consistency of his core story over more than 3 decades. Through countless interviews, documentaries, and casual conversations, the key details, S4, the sport model, the 3 gravity amplifiers, element 115, the Wednesday night tests, have never changed. This is not the pattern of a fabulist who would struggle to maintain such a complex web of details without contradictions. His demeanor also strikes many as genuine. He displays not the zeal of a cult leader, but the weary resolve of someone burdened by an unbelievable truth. They point to the technical specifics that ring true, the description of hand scanners, the layout of compartmentalized facilities, the culture of secrecy, all align with accounts from other insiders in the classified world. The recent official Pentagon and Navy acknowledgments of UAPs exhibiting physics-defying capabilities are seen as powerful, indirect validation. If the government now admits these objects are real, then Lazar's description of their propulsion system becomes a candidate explanation for their behavior, making his 1989 testimony appear prescient. The pattern of official silence, missing records, and alleged intimidation is viewed not as evidence against him, but as evidence of the power of what he is threatening to expose. To believers, the very forces arrayed to discredit him prove his importance. 30 years of unwavering consistency despite ridicule. That means something. The world into which Bob Lazar reemerged in 2018 was fundamentally different from the one he first shocked in 1989. A seismic shift had occurred in the official and public discourse surrounding UFOs, now more formally termed unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP. The catalyst was a series of events that began in late 2017, when the New York Times published a blockbuster report revealing the existence of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ADIP, and featuring declassified Navy videos of encounters with objects exhibiting impossible flight characteristics. For the first time, credible military personnel, Navy pilots like Commander David Fravor, were publicly describing exactly the kind of physics-defying maneuvers Lazar had long attributed to gravity propulsion. This was not fringe media. It was the paper of record, and the story immediately triggered a chain reaction. The Pentagon was forced to acknowledge the reality of the UAP task forces. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary report on UAPs to Congress, acknowledging dozens of incidents that remained unexplained and posed potential flight safety and national security risks. Senators from both parties began demanding answers and greater transparency. Mainstream news networks discussed the topic with seriousness previously reserved for political scandals or natural disasters. The conversation had moved from "do they exist" to "what are they" and "who is operating them." This new landscape provided a form of indirect, contextual vindication for the broader strokes of Lazar's narrative. He had always claimed the government was aware of and hiding advanced technology that defied known physics. The official admissions now confirmed that part. Yes, the government is aware of objects with extraordinary capabilities, and it has been studying them. While it falls far short of confirming his specific claims about S4 or alien craft, it demolishes the old stigma. The phenomenon he described is now an acknowledged subject of congressional hearings and Pentagon briefings. Suddenly, talking about UFOs isn't career suicide. The world Lazar described is closer to acknowledgement, creating a profound sense that the truth, in whatever form it takes, is pushing insistently against the walls of secrecy. Over the decades, several key elements from Bob Lazar's 1989 narrative have transitioned from being dismissed as science fiction to being acknowledged, either directly or indirectly, as part of our reality. The most significant validation is the government's official about-face on the phenomenon itself. Lazar claimed the government knew about and concealed advanced, unexplained aircraft. We now have the Pentagon's UAP task force, congressional reports, and military pilots on record confirming the existence of precisely such objects. The existence of secret government programs studying UFOs, once the stuff of conspiracy, is now documented fact, with programs like ADIP being publicly acknowledged. The notion of advanced propulsion research, while not validating gravity waves specifically, is also real. Government and private entities actively research breakthrough propulsion concepts, lending credence to the idea that such work occurs in classified settings. While Lazar's description of element 115's properties doesn't match the synthesized version, the fact that he named a then-unknown element by its correct atomic number years before its discovery remains a notable data point that supporters highlight. Furthermore, his description of high-tech biometric security, the hand scanner, at a secret base seemed fantastically futuristic in 1989, but such technology was indeed in use at classified sites like Los Alamos, a detail later confirmed. His technical descriptions of compartmentalization, security culture, and the location's mystique have all been corroborated by other insiders and declassified documents about the secretive world he claimed to inhabit. Not everything has been validated, but some things have, and that's significant because it means his story is not a pure fabrication from whole cloth, but is woven with threads that connect to verifiable truths. Despite the shifting landscape, the core, extraordinary assertions at the heart of Bob Lazar's story remain firmly in the realm of the unproven. There is still no physical evidence, no piece of the sport model, no sample of stable element 115, no clear, verified photograph from inside S4 that can be subjected to independent analysis. The S4 facility itself, as he described it, has never been independently confirmed to exist. It remains a geographical claim on a map, hidden behind layers of national security. The educational record discrepancy persists as the most tangible point against his credibility. The absence of his name from MIT and Caltech rolls is a fact that has never been satisfactorily explained by his supporters, and it fundamentally challenges the identity he presented. Furthermore, while element 115 exists, its synthesized properties, extreme instability, directly contradict his description of a stable, metallic fuel, a central pillar of his propulsion explanation. No other whistleblower has come forward with the exact same, first-hand, technical experience of working on those specific craft at that specific site, which one might expect in a program of that scale. The gravitational propulsion system he described remains a theoretical fantasy in public science, with no known mechanism to make it practical. The core claims, alien spacecraft at S4, remain exactly where they were in 1989, and proven. They are supported by circumstance, anecdote, and pattern, but not by the kind of incontrovertible proof that would settle the debate once and for all. Regardless of where one stands on its truth, the legacy of Bob Lazar's 1989 interview is undeniable and profound. It was a cultural detonator. It took the abstract concept of Area 51 and gave it a specific, tantalizing narrative, a location, a job description, a technology. It permanently fused the idea of alien spacecraft with that patch of desert in the public imagination, fueling everything from tourism to Hollywood blockbusters to a viral internet meme. It empowered a generation of researchers and prompted thousands of individuals to look at the night sky and at their government with new questions. The interview also pioneered a template for UFO disclosure, the technically detailed whistleblower facing government obstruction. It shifted media coverage, proving there was a massive, engaged audience for serious treatment of the topic, paving the way for the mainstream outlets that would break the Navy UAP story decades later. Bob Lazar himself became a permanent, polarizing figure in UFO history, either the most important whistleblower of all time or the author of its most elaborate myth. His story created a framework that later revelations would seem to fill in. One interview, 30 years, countless questions, and we're still listening because it asked the biggest question of all: what if it's true? As we near the end of this long journey through claims and counterclaims, evidence and enigma, it's worth pausing to ask a simple question. Why does this story hold such power over us? Why do we return to it, discuss it, and let it fill our minds as we prepare for rest? The answer lies deep within our human nature. We are creatures of curiosity, wired to seek out patterns and explanations, but we are also beings of wonder, drawn to the edges of the map where "Here be dragons" is still written. In a world often explained, cataloged, and demystified by science, a story like Bob Lazar's offers a doorway back to a sense of profound mystery. It whispers that the universe might still hold wonders beyond our current comprehension. This story also touches a profound, almost primal, desire, the longing to know we are not alone. The idea that intelligent life exists elsewhere, that we are part of a cosmic community, is both humbling and comforting. It places our human struggles and triumphs in a grander context. Believing, or even just considering, that something extraordinary is hidden in the desert satisfies a deep need for there to be more to reality than our daily routines. There is a strange comfort in mystery itself. Certainties can be harsh and limiting, but a mystery is a space for imagination, for hope, for possibility. It allows our minds to wander into realms of what if, which can be a more peaceful place to dwell than the rigid confines of a settled, perhaps mundane, truth. We listen to these stories not because we are gullible, but because we are imaginative. We listen because part of us wants to believe, and there's nothing wrong with that. In a story like Bob Lazar's, the concept of truth becomes multi-layered and complex. We often think of truth as binary. A statement is either factually correct or it is not. But here, we must consider different dimensions. There is the objective, historical truth of what physically happened at S4 in the late 1980s. That truth remains locked away, accessible only to a select few, if it exists in any record at all. Then there is Lazar's truth, his personal, experiential reality. From his perspective, he is recounting events exactly as he remembers them. Whether those memories correspond to external reality is the great debate, but their consistency and detail form a coherent truth for him. This leads us to the intersection of belief and evidence. For those who believe Lazar, the evidence is circumstantial but compelling. His verifiable employment, the corroborating witnesses to the test flights, the later government acknowledgments. For skeptics, the lack of hard, physical evidence and the problematic educational records constitute proof of a different truth, that the story is fabricated. Both sides use the same facts to build different frameworks of understanding. In cases involving classified intelligence, the usual mechanisms for establishing truth, transparency, documentation, peer review, are deliberately disabled. This creates a permanent state of ambiguity where the truth is not so much hidden as it is defined by the secrecy surrounding it. We are left, then, to navigate a space where absolute proof is impossible for the public to attain. We must make peace with not knowing, or choose a truth based on personal interpretation of the available fragments. This ambiguity is not a failure of the story, but perhaps its most authentic feature. It reflects the human condition of seeking understanding in a universe that rarely offers complete answers. The story forces us to sit with uncertainty, to weigh intuition against skepticism, and to define what truth means when the facts are just out of reach. Perhaps the real truth is that some things exist in the space between provable and impossible, in the realm of enduring questions that shape our curiosity more than any final answer ever could. Let us, for a moment, step away from the fraught debate over documents and memories, and simply look up. Consider the night sky that stretched above Bob Lazar in the Nevada desert, the same vast expanse that hangs over each of us. It is an endless canvas of pinprick lights, each a distant sun, many likely circled by planets of their own. This is the true scale of the mystery. The story of S4 and reverse-engineered craft, whether fact or fiction, is ultimately a tiny, earthly footnote to the cosmic question posed by those billions of stars. What and who might exist among them? The statistics are staggering. With hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, and an increasing number confirmed to host Earth-like planets, the sheer probability suggests we cannot possibly be alone. The universe is nearly 14 billion years old, plenty of time for civilizations to have risen, perhaps fallen, or advanced to levels we can scarcely imagine. Our own technological civilization is a mere blink in cosmic time. When we gaze upward, we are not just looking at points of light. We are looking at potential homes, at possibilities, at stories unfolding in time and space far removed from our own. This cosmic perspective is the ultimate gift of stories like Lazar's. They act as a lens, focusing our attention back to the fundamental wonder. They remind us that our world is a small, beautiful craft sailing through an immense and silent sea. The questions they raise, are we alone? What is possible, are more valuable than any single answer. They expand our minds, humble our egos, and connect us to the timeless human act of looking up and wondering. As your eyes grow heavy, let your thoughts drift to that star-filled void. Under the same stars, somewhere, someone might be looking back, asking their own questions, and dreaming under the same cosmic night. In our quest for knowledge, we often forget the profound comfort found in not knowing. A mystery, like the one we've explored together, is not a problem to be solved so much as a space to be inhabited. It is a room where the mind can wander without pressure, where imagination is allowed to breathe. In a world that demands definitive answers and clear resolutions, an enduring mystery offers a different kind of gift, the permission to wonder. There is a gentle peace in accepting that some questions have no ready answers, that some truths remain wrapped in shadows. This acceptance allows us to preserve a sense of wonder, a feeling that often fades in adulthood. The unknown is not something to fear, but something that keeps the universe feeling vast, alive, and full of potential. When we release the tight grip of needing to prove or disprove, to categorize and file away, we can simply experience the story. We can feel the cool desert air, picture the silent craft, and ponder the stars, without the burden of judgment. The mystery itself becomes a companion, a gentle presence that asks for curiosity, not conclusions. Tonight, you don't need to solve the mystery. You don't need to decide. Just let it wash over you, a wave of possibility that lulls rather than agitates, that invites your mind to relax into the beautiful, spacious realm of what if. Our journey through the story of Bob Lazar now comes to a close. We have traveled from the silent Nevada desert to the heights of cosmic speculation, from scrutinized documents to the depths of human belief. What can we say with certainty? That a man came forward with an incredible story, that his claims sparked a firestorm of debate that still burns, that some parts of his background check out, while others vanish into fog, that his narrative, true or not, permanently altered our cultural conversation about UFOs, secrecy, and what might be possible. What remains is the realm of possibility, a space where his testimony lives, sustained by its internal consistency, its tantalizing details, and the undeniable shift in official attitudes that followed decades later. The value of his story may not lie in its factual verification, but in its function. It acted as a catalyst. It gave a generation a framework for questioning authority and imagining a universe far stranger than we were taught. It demanded that we look at the night sky and our own government with a more critical and curious eye. For that alone, his testimony holds significance. Whether prophet or storyteller, Bob Lazar gave us something to wonder about. And in the end, the wonder may be the most valuable part of all. Now, let your mind drift away from analysis, away from debate, and settle into the peaceful stillness of the desert night. Picture the vast, open basin, bathed in soft moonlight. Feel the gentle, cool breeze as it whispers across the sands, stirring the sagebrush with a quiet, rustling sigh. Look up at the infinite tapestry of stars, clear and sharp in the thin, dry air. They wheel slowly, silently, in their ancient patterns, a cosmic clock marking time on a scale we can barely comprehend. There is a quiet hum in this stillness, not a sound, but a feeling, the hum of possibility. The feeling that in this great, silent expanse, anything could be true. Let that feeling surround you now. Let it soften the edges of your thoughts. Allow the questions, the craft, the mysteries to gently recede. They are not gone. They are simply resting, like the desert itself, holding their secrets in the dark. Feel your own consciousness beginning to soften, to drift as weightless and directionless as a feather on that gentle wind. There is no need to hold on to anything, no need to solve or understand. The night holds everything for you. The mystery continues without your effort, and that's perfectly all right. Let go and rest. The questions are patient. They will wait. The stars continue their slow dance. The wind continues its soft song, and the desert keeps its secrets. And for now, so can you. Release the day, release the story, and drift into peaceful, dreamless darkness. Rest well, wandering traveler. The mysteries will be here when you wake.